Today on Crochet 101, we're going to talk about the tools you'll need. The good news? There aren't very many. So last week we talked about yarn and what kind of yarn there is and so on and so forth. Obviously you're going to need some kind of yarn or other material to crochet with, but today we're going to look at the tools you'll use. The first thing you're going to need is a crochet hook. Okay, so this is a crochet hook, and that little hook thing at the end is the end that's used to catch yarn or thread and pull it through the other loops that you're working with. Moving down the hook, this is called the throat. It is a real narrow area just past the hook, and it's a shaped section that guides the yarn or thread up onto the working area. This next part is called the working area. It's what we measure when we tell you what size a crochet hook is, and it's what determines how big the loops are that you're working. And it is the section where the stitches are actually worked. This wider, flatter section is the finger hold. It's where you grip the hook with your thumb and either your index or your third finger, depending on what's more comfortable for you. Then the remainder is the handle. It's the long end, and it's used for balance, and it either rests under the fingers or on the hand. Crochet hooks can be aluminum, wood, plastic. The most popular material for standard crochet hooks is aluminum. It works really well. And the size of the hook is based on the size of its working area, that part that we said is where we're working the actual loops, and it's measured in millimeters. Typical crochet hook sizes go from a size B, which is 2.25 millimeters in diameter, up to a size Q, which is 15 millimeters in diameter. Then there are the steel crochet hooks. They are much smaller. They're used for working with thread and very fine yarn, and the diameters of the working area on the steel hooks are also measured in millimeters, but they're assigned numbers instead of letters. And the bigger the number, the smaller the hook. Another tool that you're going to want, you probably don't need it immediately, but you're going to want down the road, is a tapestry needle or a yarn needle. And these are big needles that have a nice open eye that you can get the yarn through. And they're used for weaving in the ends of the yarn, or for whip stitching crochet pieces together, sewing seams on crocheted garments, or attaching any little finishing touches to the project. If you find that you have trouble getting your yarn through the eye of the tapestry needle, there are needle threaders specifically for yarn for tapestry needles. Once you get to the point where you're making things where the size really matters, you're going to want to measure your gauge, and then you'll need a gauge ruler, and it's used to measure small areas of your project or to measure how many stitches there are per inch or per centimeter, and that helps you determine if you've got the right size hook for the way you stitch. Another handy tool is a measuring tape. It can be used to measure stitches for gauge as well, but more commonly it's used to take body measurements if you're making a garment, or to measure the overall dimensions of your project. Crochet markers are pretty handy. They're used to mark the right side of your work or to designate a particular stitch or row or round for later reference. These are nice but very optional. You can accomplish the same thing with a scrap piece of yarn or safety pins just as easily, so don't feel like you have to rush out and buy these. This is another specialty item. These are yarn bobbins. They're used to keep your yarn from knotting when you're working with several smaller pieces of yarn all at the same time. These are definitely not something you need as a beginner. And this is a row counter. These are very helpful when you're working a long series of rows or rounds and don't want to lose track of where you're at. However, you can also just keep tally marks on a piece of paper. It will do the same thing. Okay, in our next video, we're actually going to get started crocheting. And to get started on the lessons in this series, all you're going to need is a size H crochet hook and some worsted weight yarn. You want that yarn to be in a solid color, either a light one or a bright one, to make it easier to see if you've made a mistake with your stitches. And of course you'll probably want a pair of scissors, but any pair of scissors will do. Nothing special. So I look forward to seeing you next time when we get started on a project.